Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. I hope you had a good weekend. We are here to talk about footsteps in the Pacific. So all the shows this week have some kind of element of following routes through the Pacific, except for the one when we're going to Italy with Neil Cherry to talk about the first British airborne raid onto the aqueduct in Italy. But apart from that, it's footsteps in the Pacific. So just quickly, if you are new to the channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing that. Click the button and click the little bell so you get notifications, and also check us out on Patreon and also the YouTube membership scheme. But right now, we're going to, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guest. So Dave Holland is an American who resides in Australia and has spent many, many hours walking the battlefields of the Solomon Islands. So we are absolutely delighted to have someone who has been to these areas, because as you know on this channel, we like to talk with people who have actually walked the ground, not just read the archives, actually been there. And we've got some great video clips we're going to show you today. And it's still Monday for me, but it's Tuesday for Dave. So I'll bring him in now. Good evening, Dave Holland. How are you doing? Well, good morning. Sorry.
I'm doing well. And right off the bat, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to allow me to talk about Guadalcanal. So it's 6 o'clock in the morning, Australia time. Best time of day.
Brilliant. So, you know, I just said on the top of the show that you have had the option and the opportunity to travel to these places there. So just very briefly, how did you get into walking the battlefields? And I should point out, folks, the link to Dave's YouTube channel, Walking Guadalcanal, is in the description below, so you can go there and see all his great content. But how did you get started?
Well, living in Australia, I work for the Australian government. So the Australian government has a good interest or a keen interest in the Solomon Islands. So first time I was sent to the Solomon Islands was 2009. So being a former US Marine and a military history nut, I was in my element. So I was there for the first time for 4 months. So any available spare time I had, I spent walking the battlefields. And then from 2010 to about 2012, I did small trips, like a month or two at a time. And then in 2018, I had the opportunity. I was deployed there for 2 years. So I thought, I know what I'm going to do in my spare time. Because a lot of the people who go to Guadalcanal on these trips, tour trips, only go for 1 week. And some people never get there their whole life. So I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity for me to walk the battlefields, film it for the people who never get the chance to go there, or the ones that only do the week-long tours. And plus, it also gave me a chance to focus on the small skirmish sites. It's not really covered in most of the, the books about Guadalcanal, and allowed me to do the research on the ground from especially a military perspective and see, okay, let's just see if this is really what happened. And I found a lot of stuff, uncovered a lot of stuff in my research.
And it has to be said, as a US Marine, I mean, it's sacred ground, isn't it? I mean, there are other places, of course, Iwo Jima and Peleliu and Tarawa, but I mean, Guadalcanal is really the first major campaign. That's where the honors were earned. That's where the world really got to hear about the Marine Corps in World War II. So it must be amazing, you know, following in their footsteps, and also being able to, you say, spend time there, getting to grips with it.
Oh yes, I mean, it'd be just like I tell the Australian guys, you know, it'd be like an Australian soldier being assigned to Gallipoli, you know, for 2 years. What am I going to do? I'm just going to walk the battlefields. Yeah.
So to whet your appetite, folks, we're just going to show you one of the clips here, just tell us where we are. This is the kind of thing we've got coming up later on.
All right, so you're on as the Marines called it, hill number 2 on Edson's Ridge, or Bloody Ridge. It's also called Hill 123. So basically, this is where the command post was on the second night that Colonel Edson, which was the Raiders commander, this is basically where he stood, where he positioned his command post. And you're looking straight ahead, so that's basically looking south, and that's toward hill number 1 or hill 80. And you can see the mountain ranges of Guadalcanal. And I think when it pans to the right, you'll see Mount Austin, which is in the opening days. If you ever read anything about Guadalcanal campaign, they call it the grassy knoll. The grassy knoll, when the Marines landed day 1, they were supposed to move to that. And there's Mount Austin there. And if you look at the contemporary photos of World War II, it looks exactly like that. The vegetation pattern is the same. And that's the Lunga River to the right, and that was a monument, an older monument.
That's just a taster, folks, of what we got coming up later on. What we're going to probably do is go through the explanation of the battles and then kind of load up the videos later on. I've got a lot of controlling to do today because I've got the PowerPoint answering your questions and loading these video files one by one. But we're going to get straight in. So we're not going to get straight to Bloody Ridge. We're going to start with a couple of other engagements, and we're going to talk about the history of the Marine Raiders. So I'm going to kind of hand it over to Dave now, but run us through the history. And folks, if you've got questions for Dave, now is the time. And also, you know, your comments generally, please keep them coming. But give us a bit about the background of the history, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. I won't go in too in depth because you could do a whole episode just on the background of the history of Raiders. But the US Marine Raiders were the first modern special operations units in U.S. military. So it all came about a couple of ways. The traditional, I guess, way that everyone thinks the Raiders evolved was patterned after the British Commandos and the Chinese guerrillas. So you had a fellow called Evans Carlson, who later became the second Raiders commander. He was the executive officer of President Roosevelt, FDR Protections Detail in Washington. So Evans Carlson, he did a tour for about a year with the Mao Zedong and the Chinese guerrillas. So he observed their techniques, and he was very impressed with the way they operated guerrilla techniques. So, and also there was another person called William Donovan. So Wild Bill Donovan, he earned a Medal of Honor in World War I. He was I think, an intelligence advisor for FDR. So he still had an idea. He said, look, I want to form a guerrilla unit also, and patterned on the British Commandos. And, you know, there was early days too in the war, especially for the U.S., and they observed what the British Commandos had done. You know, we couldn't do a full offensive, but we can do the small cuts around just to keep them occupied. So they wanted to form that unit. So General Holcomb was the Commandant of the Marine Corps at the time. So it was believed to be the pressure from FDR and to the Naval Command to form the unit, right? And then Holcomb formed this unit. But there was another stream too. At the same time, you had Holland M. Smith. He was commander of the 1st Marine Brigade, later morphed into the 1st Division. In 1941, he had formed a small unit, basically called the APD Battalion. The APDs were fast transports. So what the Americans did, they had all these mothball World War I destroyers, 4-stacker destroyers. You know, the famous ones they did the British destroyer for bases with, you know, and they gave a few away. So what they envisioned, they said, well, if we took 2 of the boilers out, we can make these fast transports, put troops in it, and also provide the transport for amphibious landing, plus also had the naval gunfire support. So they were working on that, and they picked one battalion, the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. Okay, we're going to train these guys in small boat tactics. We're going to put them on these APDs, and we're going to pick a special commander for this unit. And they did, which is Merritt Edson. You know, he was very well renowned. He was a Banana Wars 1920s guy fighting in Nicaragua. He made a good reputation, especially fighting in Nicaragua, and he was a crack shot too. But yeah, I don't want to dwell too much into this. But like I said, I want to get straight into Guadalcanal. But you had 2 streams. So you had Carlson and Donovan, and under pressure from Roosevelt, but you also had these guys, Smith and Edson, and they already had a battalion to go. They said, well, we're going to form up these battalions. So Smith had already got a battalion. It's trained in, you know, rubber boats, assaults, special warfare type things, quick raids, guerrilla type warfare. So to try to cut off Roosevelt and Donovan, you know, telling them to do it, what they did was they said, well, we'll form our own. And they called it the 1st Separate Battalion. So they were known the 1st Separate Battalion. But the powers to be, the pressure came from the Naval Command, said form another battalion. So they formed a 2nd Battalion that later morphed into the Raiders. So in January 42, the separate battalions adopted the name Raiders. So Merritt Edson had the 1st Raiders, and Evans Carlson had the 2nd Raiders.
And just to kind of jump in, you know, just to keep people up on board with what we're talking about, this is, you're saying they're kind of borrowing the idea from the British. Well, of course, we British borrowed it from elsewhere. The word commando is a Boer word from the South African campaigns down there. The Dutch-speaking Boers who were using commando techniques against us, guerrilla warfare. So So all ideas start somewhere, but the Americans may have borrowed this from the British, but it wasn't our idea to begin with. But also, I want to point out in this 1941, even 42 period, it's important that the British and Americans are making an attempt to try and get aggressive, because we haven't got our massive great navies ready yet. We haven't got our huge invasion war. That doesn't come till 44, till 45 even. So the whole Churchill idea about doing, as you say, their little units to start taking the war to the enemy. The raiders come into that. Before we've got the big assault forces, let's just start some little ones that can start making that attempt and taking the war to the enemy. So it's a similar history, really.
Yes.
So we'll come back to a bit more about the history, generally the formation, but we're going to go straight into the explanation now. So we know where we are, folks. We're the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal. We're talking about the campaigns of 1942, but we're going to, before we get to Bloody Ridge, we're going to talk about this one. So I'm going to hand back to you, Dave, and folks, when you've got questions, far away, but we've got more illustrations, more photos, but I'm going to hand back to you. So explain what this one's about.
Okay, I'll give a little bit of a background. I won't get into too much because I know in your past episodes, I mean, and most of the readers know about Pearl Harbor and how the Japanese, especially for the first 4 or 5 months, how they came to be in the Southwest Pacific. But the thing about Tulagi, and Tulagi, I'll give a little bit of background on Tulagi. Tulagi was the government seat of the British. So this was all the British Solomon Islands. For the war was called the British Solomon Islands, and the British actually controlled it. And Tulagi was their colonial seat. And if you look at the photos of old Tulagi, it looked like something you would think out of a British colonial. I mean, it had outposts. You know, you had the chief residence, and you had a golf course. You had you had tennis courts. You had the clubs. You had all that, and it would look a very, very pretty island at the time. It was great photos. So Tulagi was the seat of it, and also there was Gavutu and Tasimboko, 2 small islands off Tulagi. Now, they were home of the Lever brothers, hopefully I pronounced this right, and the Burns and Philip steamships. So what they did was, when the war started, the Australians sent a float plane base, Australian Air Force, to Gavutu. And they had a small float plane base of PBY Catalinas. So they were there pre-war. So in the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Japanese in May 1942, they were going to hit Port Moresby head on and take it with a direct amphibious assault. So the main assault went toward the Coral Sea to Port Moresby. The small branch shot off and went straight to Tulagi. There were Japanese Special Naval Landing Force, the 3rd Kuri guys, and we'll show a photo later of them. They landed at Tulagi. So the Australians that was there, they booked out very quickly. They left very quickly because, I think there was one section of Australian commandos or independent company and a few Air Force guys. So they left and they occupied Tulagi. And Tulagi, what they were going to do was, the main effort was going to be in Port Moresby. They were Coral Sea knocked them out. So they hit Bunangona, which is the top part of Papua New Guinea. And they were going to go over the Kokoda and attack from that route. But Tulagi would serve a couple of purposes. One, it would provide the cover for any American or Allied attempt coming up from the right there, or coming in up from the Southwest Pacific. It would cover their attack, and also it would serve as a forming point, because they haven't initially, before Midway, they were going to continue their assault down and go to Fiji, Samoa, and that area, New Caledonia, and cut Australia completely off. They haven't. They put it on the back burner, but then after Midway, we'll keep that rolling. Let's take Port Moresby first, and then we'll continue on. But Tulagi would be a kicking off base for that. And the Japanese, they took over the float plane base, and they put their own float planes there. So that was the setting for Tulagi. So Guadalcanal, they had their guys at Tulagi. Now the Japanese, at that stage, there was a lot of beef cattle on Guadalcanal, because it was coconut plantations for the war. So they were sending parties over to get the beef cattle and to do a few other things. And then they got to a place called the Lunga Plains. They said, this is a great place to put an airfield. So in July 1942, they started building an airfield at Lunga Plains. All right. I could go off on all kind of different tangents here, but I'll try to keep it, not get too into the details. But I think most of the viewers are familiar with the Coast Watchers. I think it's been mentioned in a couple of the other shows. But the Coast Watchers had a couple of Coast Watchers on, or 3 Coast Watchers on Guadalcanal. And between them and some of the air reconnaissance for the B-17s, they found out the Japanese were building an airfield. So the 1st Marine Division had been sent to New Zealand for a couple of purposes. One, to garrison New Zealand, because all of New Zealand had the 2nd Infantry Division over in Europe. And there was hardly anyone except for a few militia units. So New Zealanders were glad to see the 1st Marine Division. And 2, more importantly, they were there to, I wouldn't say more importantly, but they were there to train up for 6 months, because they'd been fleshed out with, I call them the December Pearl Harbor recruits. So a lot of guys joined the Marine Corps after January, the big call up. So a lot of these guys had only been in the Marine Corps at the most 6-7 months, so they were, I'd say they were trained, but, I remember when I was in the Marine Corps, my first 6-7 months, I mean, no way I could, go against a major, a unit, and I know I was very well trained compared to these guys. So they were going to be sent to, there to train for 6 months. So anyway, they got the word that, after Midway, that allowed the Allies to, okay, now we can maybe start to go on an offensive a bit. Now, under Admiral King, he pushed this idea. So they decided to take Guadalcanal. Well, actually, the orders was to take Tulagi and the surrounding areas. It wasn't directly, the orders are to take Guadalcanal. It's going to be take Tulagi and the surrounding areas, which meant to be Guadalcanal. Anyway, on August the 7th, 1942, early morning, they came in, and they didn't come in from the east. They come in from the west, and they come under a cloud cover. That's how the Japanese didn't really see them. It was raining there all the time anyway. They come under a cloud cover. And the Raiders, so that's just leave it there for a while. The Raiders, they knew that the American intelligence was fairly, they didn't have that great of intelligence, and they were just getting intelligence. They didn't have many guys on the ground. They had some of the coast watchers, but they didn't have that much intelligence. But they did know that Tulagi was based by Japanese Special Naval Landing Force, Riku Sentai. Hopefully I pronounced that right, but I won't go into that because you're going to have a whole show on those guys.
Yeah, and just to interrupt, folks, we've got a whole show on the Japanese Naval Landing Forces coming up in Special Forces Week next week with Austin Adachi, who is living in Japan. So, as always, folks, there's always these spider's web of shows connect to other shows. And of course, when Dave talked about Port Moresby and New Guinea, we've had quite a raft of shows about the fighting there over the previous months. So there's always other connections with other battles, which we love on this channel. So back to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. But they knew that the Japanese Special Naval Landing Force had occupied Tulagi and Guadalcanal and Tasimboko. So they expected a fight there. So what Vandergriff, who was the Major General Vandergriff, he was the commander of the 1st Marine Division. He decided to send his best units to Tulagi because it's going to be a hard fight. So the units he picked to go to Tulagi, and you got Tasimboko and Guadalcanal, which is just off to the right. I don't know if we have a map of those guys. But he picked the 1st Raider Battalion. No. Yeah, he picked the 1st Raider Battalion, and he picked the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. You'll see them up in the top left. And the 1st Parachute Battalion. Yeah, the Marines had a parachute unit too. So they're the most well-trained units he had. So you throw in the best to start with. So Edson, the way they're going to attack it, you'll notice they came in on Beach Blue here. So which is the hold on, let me get this right. Yeah, which is the northwest portion. Now the southeast portion is where all the main landings bits are, the top right there. That's the main landing. That's where the Japanese landed in May. It's the only really place it's not covered by coral. So the Japanese put all their defenses really on the bottom end of the island there, southern end, around Hill 281, the very bottom. That's where all the defenses was, and they were expecting an amphibious assault there in the top bit, where they said the stores and the residence and the northeast, or the south eastern part there. So what the Marine planners did, they said, we don't want to go straight into the mouth of the tiger, so to speak. So what we'll do is we'll go to the what we deem to be the undefended part, but it's full of coral. So the Japanese wouldn't expect us to land there because there's about 100 to 200, 150 meters away. There's a big couple of coral ledges. I've walked out to that area too, and it definitely is coral ledges. So I came in and had the Higgins boats, which they had the first edition of the Higgins boats. So I think we're all familiar with the Higgins boats. You got one right behind you there, and you back.
It's not a real one, folks. It's a photo.
Yeah. But these Higgins boats were the first model, so they didn't have the ramp that went down the front. So you had to jump off the sides. So when they landed, they hit the coral about 100 meters out, and they jumped in the water. Luckily none of them drowned, but some of them jumped in the shell holes, because previous to this, they had naval gunfire support, and they had a carrier air that it softened it up a bit. And that other photo you had there, the black and white one with the smoke, that one. That's obviously taken from a carrier plane on the morning of D-Day, and you could see the preparation fire and smoke. Looks like they hit. I don't know if that's the British club. I think that's off to the left. It's probably an oil dump. And there's a golf course, city golf course. But anyway, if you just go back to the other map, Paul, that one. So they landed, and no opposition, which they expected. As soon as they landed, the Japanese, they knew there was a lot of ships there, and they go, "Oh, this isn't good." So they radioed back, and they basically said, "We're under heavy attack. Long live the Emperor. See you later." Sort of speaking on exactly what they said, but that was the last they ever heard of these guys. So as soon as they landed, the Marines, the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines landed behind the Raiders. So Raiders came in first. They did a right wheel pivot. So you see they got Bravo. I won't say. So I keep saying Bravo, Delta, Alpha. That's just ingrained in my head from years with the NATO phonetics. They wouldn't call it Alpha, Bravo in those days. I'll just say A, B, C, D. Probably easier.
Yeah. You're not the first to get trapped up in the changing phonetic alphabets over the years. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah, on my video, it's a pet peeve with some people. It's not Alpha Company. Yeah, I know it's not Alpha Company. Sorry, it's just ingrained in my brain housing group, so to speak. It's been drilled in. But anyway, you got the B, D, A, and C Company. So as soon as they did a right wheel. They started advance across the island. 2-5 came in and went to the left to clear it out. So they had no opposition. 2-5, and everything was going quite well with them. Until they got to the workers' barracks, and with B Company there, and that was a Chinese town they called Chinese Village. You had some Chinese there pre-war, had some shops and things. So they started taking a bit of fire there. So they overcome those. A couple of Japanese snipers were going after them. You got to remember, these guys are 3rd Curry. Go to the Japanese photo of the Japanese. These guys were the 3rd Curry Special Naval Landing fellas, and these guys are all reservists. You think all reservists are no good, but the average age of these guys are in their 30s, and these are the NCOs and officers. I don't know if you have a good look at them. They don't look like little stereotypical what they used to think of in the days, the small Japanese, with the glasses and all that. These are big fellas, and none of them have glasses, and they're very capable guys. But these Special Naval Landing guys were all designed initially for offensive operations, not defensive, like we see later, but you guys get that in the other shows. But yeah, these are the guys. None of these guys survived, by the way. I don't know what the guy is circled up here. I think that was the photo they probably captured, and I would say that was probably him. Who knows? We'll go back to the drawing, the painting. Yeah, that one. So they moved in the first day, and Hill 208, they experienced the first real resistance. So in Hill 208, on the southern side, the Japanese were in tunnels. Now, I'll say this is the first place the Americans experienced the Japanese dug in the tunnels and fighting to the last man. First time in the Pacific. And then obviously they replicated it many, many times in other islands. But this is the first taste the U.S. got of these guys fight hard. They're determined, and you got to kill every one of them to get them out of these tunnels. We're going to dig them out. Anyway, they advanced through there. In Hill 208, they had a couple of bunkers, started taking machine gun fire. And one of the most impressive fellas in the 1st Raid Battalion was a guy called Major Ken Bailey. Ken Bailey was the C Company commander. Drink a little bit of water here. So he was the C Company commander. Bailey was a big fellow. And just like most of these are the first combat for the Raiders, and even in the Marine ethos, they teach about officers and NCOs always leading from the front, especially in the first time in combat. First time in combat, these guys really have to jump up there because, even though they're highly trained troops, first time in combat, these guys could hesitate. So you need the front troop leaders to get up there and lead from example. That's what Bailey did. There was one bunker, and he's a pretty big fella, and he managed to get to the top of the bunker, and he couldn't get a hand grenade in, so he started kicking the top of this bunker. It's probably a coconut log bunker with a bit of grass and stuff, and he managed to kick his way through there, throw a grenade in, fire a few shots, take out the bunker. He also got shot in the leg at the same time. So he took a Arisaka with the Japanese rifle round in the leg, in the thigh, kept going, no problem. They kept moving through. So we'll talk more about Bailey when the Battle of Edson or Bloody Ridge comes, because he really he comes into his own. Anyway, they continued on. Then you got A and D and B. Everything was going well for them after they took out 208, and you could see the phase lines there. The phase line A. That was, sorry?
We should show that one as well, because that explains some of the terrain as well.
Yeah, so that was, you can see how thick it looked. So this was actually during the battle too. They took a photo air reconnaissance. I think that I'm not a, I know I have a working knowledge of the air and naval campaign, but I can drill very deep in the land. But someone could tell you right off the bat what type of plane that was. I mean, it's like a float plane or something, because you can see the Boeing. Anyway, they moved up. And you go back to that hand-drawn one. That was actually map I made at Tulagi when I landed. So it was one of the Marine veterans. He made that map. You keep it there because this is actually a fairly good one. So you had the spine there. You can see in the middle, that's a ridge spine. So they moved, the Marines separated and moved down the island. So they got to the, I guess where it said parade ground, and there's a black line. That was phase line A. So they started taking a lot of fire. From Hill 281, there's a ravine there. And in the ravine, the Japanese had a lot of machine guns. And then you had the parade ground and the cricket pitch. The cricket ground has been built on now, but the actual cricket pitch, which some of the American viewers wouldn't know, but the cricket pitch is still there. The concrete pitch is still on the ground there. I mean, I have a photo. I should have sent it. But that was all open. That was the golf course too. You see the cemetery, but the golf cemetery was later. That was after. But Blue Beach was a pre-war cemetery. Anyway, they moved through and started taking a lot of fire from the ravine. So they dug in for the night, and there's a good cutting there, pre-war cutting they cut through. So that was their line. So during the night, the Japanese, typical of the Japanese, they love their night attacks and infiltration. So they did some counterattacks, they call it. It wasn't bonsai charges. I'm reluctant to say bonsai charges. So there's a counterattack. They went across not, and then they actually pushed through the Marine lines a few times, but the Marines actually held them off. Right? I don't want to dwell too much in Tulagi because I want to get to the Bloody Ridge, but they held them off. And then Edson, which is the residence, that was a colonial British resident, the residence, like the governor, you so to speak. He wasn't the governor, but the resident, the head fellow of the island. That's where he lived. And it was built on stilts. And during the night, there was a number of Japanese that actually made it underneath the residence, and they killed 3 Marines. And I remember reading one Marine's memoir. The Marines got them. They said, the Japanese are under the residence. So the Marines got on both sides and started shooting. And they go, okay. This one Marine said, I'll just put my head down because the other Marine bullets were coming straight toward me. So he ended up killing those Japanese with hand grenades. But yeah, that got a bit hectic. Now, just to say on Hill 81, how did they get these Japanese out of these holes? All right. This was pre-bazooka flamethrower days. So there's a guy called Gunnery Sergeant Angus Goss. So what Edson did, he's pretty smart, switched on tactically guy. He took his headquarters platoon and trained him to be, that's one of the actual bunkers. He trained him to be the demolition guys too. And Angus Goss was like an expert in demolition. So it said, how are we going to take out these bunkers? So what Angus Goss and a couple of other guys decided to do, they're just taking the TNT blocks, putting them on wooden slabs. Then they would hang off the cliff and lower it down. And then right when it got over the cliffs there, they would pull it and blast it and try to and seal them shut. And to this day, there's still Japanese sealed shut in some of those caves. And there was one time in the cutting, which we don't have a picture of the cutting, but there was a Japanese hole cave, and it kept running in and out. And the Marines were on both sides of the cuttings, and they couldn't engage them because they'd get crossfired, and they couldn't get in the cutting because they get shot. And they were, how are we going to get them out? So they went on top of the hill. And the only thing they could have is all improvise, adapt, and overcome. So they took petrol, 44 liters or 50-gallon cans. Being an Australian and American, I can flip these back and forth. I still think in Fahrenheit though. but they poured the fuel down into the cave, and then they end up, blasting them out that way. So it took them a good day and a half to kill most of the Japanese on the island. Even days afterwards, they were still taking sniper fire and things like that. So it was a very, very hard fight to Tulagi. So they had it secured by the end of the 8th, even though it officially was secured by the 8th. But like I said, there was still some sniper fire and stuff. And just to mention, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, because it's all about the Raiders, but I don't want to leave out the regular line guys, line companies. They ended up on the second day assisting the Raiders to take out these the Japanese in Hill 281. Now, the garrison they estimated was 350 Japanese. Only 3 survived. Wow. There's a whole combination of things. But I know you read a lot of memoirs before they even landed. The orders for the Marines were, we're taking no prisoners, and this we don't have a chance to take prisoners. This is a great photo. This is taken on the steps of the residency. You can see how this one Marine's to the left. You see how it's raised on stilts. That was where the Japanese were under on the end of the first night, and they had to kill those Japanese underneath that. But these are some of the officers that took place. And the guy Edson's in the bottom here, and the bottom second from the right, sitting on the bottom steps. He's Edson. And right above him is General Purtis. He was the assistant division commander, and so Vandergrift gave him overall command of Tulagi landings. Now you notice Edson's helmet. Now this brings up a point. There's another guy off to his top left. The other guy's got a helmet like that. So the Raiders took helmet covers and burlap sacks, and that was a whole thing that you picked the Raiders out. Some of the Raiders actually had homemade camouflage on the uniforms. They took dark splotches and put them on the uniforms, or painted the uniforms like almost black, but dark splotches. I've seen some of them. But that was an indication of Raiders, and I forgot what the Japanese called them. Some like, I wouldn't say rag heads or something. I forgot what they call them, or burlap heads or helmets. But yeah, then they had a nickname for Edson. His troops called him Eddie the Mole, because they said he looked like a mole in his helmet. You can see how his helmet's oversized there.
Yeah, the small head. Yeah.
Yeah, they called him the Mole, Eddie the Mole.
We've got a couple of questions coming in, so I'll try and remember the ones we've had. Is what, if anything, did the Raiders have in air support?
Yeah, air support. And this one, because Henderson Field obviously wasn't operational at the time.
No.
So they had, I forgot how many carriers, but they had carrier air support. And I don't know what carrier. I think there were 3 carriers, maybe 2 or 3. After fact check me on that one, but it's definitely they had carrier air support, and that was from the Wildcats and the Dauntless.
And another
one, they had naval gunfire support too, direct shots from the destroyers and cruisers.
Cheers, thank you. Another one was how much, if any, jungle training had the Raiders had before landing here?
That's a good question. So they didn't have any jungle training, obviously, in the U.S., but what they did was, because a lot of the units were being sent out to some of the islands to garrison those islands, because they thought the Japanese, especially before Midway, was rolling straight through the Southwest Pacific. So they sent the Raiders, along with the 7th Marines Regiment, they sent the Raiders to Samoa. Samoa, if you read the reports, what they did there, the training reports from the Raiders, they did some hard training. And they did a lot of night training. A lot of Americans and Allies in general, the units didn't do night training. What the Japanese did, but these guys did a lot of night training. For example, what they would do is, on Samoa, they would do a pack march, and then they'd repeat it the next night on the same terrain. So it gave them a bit of a terrain appreciation, how to operate at night. So Edson was a big believer in mobility and speed. So he had his guys, I forgot the miles per hour they had to do, but they moved quick.
Right. And then one last one, then we'll look at your photos from Tim Sampson. Was there any attempt by the Japanese to relieve the island? Because you say it takes sort of a day and a half, 2 days to clear. Do they ever try and bring anybody else in to reinforce?
No, not during the initial battle, because Gavutu and Tasimboko right off that would be the only place they could have immediate support, but they were under attack too. Now the Tulagi was manned for months and months, in fact the whole time, but they were really, for the first 3 or 4 months, they kept the whole 2nd Marine Regiment there because they expected Tulagi to be a counterattack by the Japanese to hit Tulagi. So that was with no direct attempt. They sent all the resources to Guadalcanal, which is 20 miles away.
Okay. So we'll just run through the photos you supplied, then we'll move on to our next sequence there. So, I mean,
boys anti-tank.
Yeah, I noticed that. As soon as you sent that to me, I thought, what the hell are the Raiders doing with a British boys anti-tank rifle? But you have to tell them how they ended up getting their hands on that.
So basically, I think I had about 8 of them or something, but yeah, they had them all the way through. So the Raiders are lightly armed. In fact, they didn't have the 81. So, once again, they put them in the APDs, which is the fast destroyer. So they couldn't put any vehicles or any tank guns or anything like that. So they had to have some type of anti-tank capability. And that was the days before the bazooka. So Edson had seen these things, and Edson had observed the Japanese in China, in Shanghai, when he was with the 4th Marines and the China Marines. So he's observed their techniques and tactics, and he knew what type of vehicles they had, like the armored vehicles and the light tanks. And these things were, I don't think they ever used them against any tanks. I don't think it was ever recorded. I think they might have used them to few sniping at a few people because they're very effective.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was how they come about it. And they looked around the world and they go, well, this is probably the best one we can get. And the British have them, so let's grab them.
Yeah. And then these are just some terrain photos of the area around there that you've.
That's the golf course.
That's the golf course. Yep. It
was.
We did that one. That's showing some of those kind of cliff-like positions, and you can imagine those bunkers in there. And you say there were still dead Japanese sealed up in some of those bunkers.
Might have been some Germans, but yeah, definitely some.
Yeah, might have been. It was a slip of the tongue there. I'm an ETO guy. Just.
Yeah, no. Yeah, apparently they are. Yep. And that's the ravine. If you look straight ahead, so that's where the cricket ground was, where that house was. And you can see the dog there in the bottom. He followed me everywhere on that island when I was taking. But yeah, that was the ravine. So when it's burnt off, you can see it's a concave ravine and like a little amphitheater, and it was just full of bunkers and machine guns. So the Marines had to attack straight into that across open cricket field. And the Japanese, they counterattacked across that too.
Super. So. And that's showing those kind of houses on stilts. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Hill 208. When I was talking about Bailey, when he kicked over the Japanese bunker, this is facing the seaway, and the Marines had just passed it on this road, and they got shot at from the reverse of that hill. So then they go in and take it out. Yeah, and that's just more it's looking back to the south, and that was across it was a part of the golf course. And this is where C Company advanced. So yeah. And that's part of the landing. Landing's a little bit further down, but yeah, beach blue.
Brilliant stuff. I mean, it's an amazing place to visit. I mean, as an ETO guy, just seeing these kind of places, it's nearly as good as being there. And again, if people go to your channel, you can see much more of your walking tours there. But for me as a European, these incredible terrain.
That's the residency. That's where the stilts were, and it's sitting on top there. You can see how the boss fellow, they call him over there. The boss fellow had the best house, and nice and coolly breeze, and he had good views over there. It's a beautiful harbor. Tulagi Harbor is. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, the British were looking for a place to put their Pacific Fleet, and that's actually a deep water harbor. It's one of the best ones in the whole Solomon, in the whole area. It's a good sheltered harbor. So that was where the Japanese fleet would have based out of if they punched further down in the southwest.
Brilliant stuff. So we're going to move on to our next one. And Bloody Ridge is coming, folks. We're just doing some of these other stories. It would be silly not to have Dave's knowledge of these other incidents. So, but we are getting to Bloody Ridge. But let's do this one first.
All right. This is we'll have to talk about Tanzamboko if we're going to talk about Bloody Ridge, because this set the stage for Bloody Ridge. So Tasimboko. So when they pulled the Raiders over, I think the 30th and 31st of August, they pulled them from Tulagi. They came over to Lunga, which was the Marine perimeter, right? So Vandergriff, the division commander, said these are going to be my reserve troops. Well, Edson being Edson, very aggressive, and he wanted these guys to go on the offensive all the time. So he went to a guy called Colonel Thomas, which is the chief of staff or the chief of planning for the division. So he put a few ideas in his head. He goes, can we do a raid here? Can we do this? Savo Island, they did a reconnaissance at Savo Island. Can we do a raid on Cape Esperance? But the local Solomon Island scouts, and I'll give a plug to these guys because they very, we could do an episode on these guys, and a guy called Jacob Vuza, which a lot of your viewers will know Jacob Vuza, or Sir Jacob Vuza, which is the most decorated Solomon Islander of all time. Very tough fellow. I know some of his grandchildren and his family. You don't mess with them either. But these guys were trained by the Coast Watchers. Well, ran by the Coast Watchers. Martin Clemens was the main Coast Watcher there, and he was actually incorporating intelligence, marine intelligence. Then we had these scouts working for him. The scouts come back and said, "Look, there's a number of a few thousand Japanese at Tanzamboko, Tavu Point. They're there." So the Marines intelligence said, "Oh, these would be the same guys from the Battle of Alligator Creek or Ilu River, the Cheeky Detachment, the 28th Regiment. These are the remnants of these guys. You know, they're just a motley crew." And they kind of dismissed them. But Edson heard that and he goes, "Oh, this would be a good chance to go do a raid on these guys, take them out, right? This is what we're trained for. Let us do raids. You know, we're raiders. You know, it's in our name. We just do what we're designed to do." So he talked to the division commander and into it, and he goes, "Okay, go do it." So they, on the morning of the 8th September, they punched the run, and they hit Tavu Point, which is to the right, and they were going to advance on Tasimboko. Tasimboko was a village where they thought these Japanese remnants were. So as soon as they landed, they started noticing, they moved in a bit, and they said, "There's about 1,000 life preservers here. You know, there's Japanese rations, anti-tank guns. You know, this ain't a motley crew. What's going on here?" And what had happened, the Japanese had landed all their reinforcements. And I'll talk about Kawaguchi and his brigade in a minute, but the Japanese had landed their main attack force at Tavu Point. And they had moved through that area, and they had left his rear guard. And at the same time, you had some artillery guys from the 2nd Japanese Division that just landed there too, you know, a few hours before. So that was their life jackets and, you know, and some of their 75 millimeter mountain howitzers they located right after that was there. But the Japanese, you know, why didn't they, you know, where were they at? So at the same time the Marines landed, there was a US naval transport and some warships streaming by. And the Japanese seen that and thought, "Oh, it's a major invasion." So they kind of retreated or advanced in another direction. And so once the Japanese found out, okay, there's not a major invasion, but there's Marines here, they started a bit of a fight. So what the Raiders did, you'll see the first parachute, right? I'll mention this too. I forgot to mention it. The first parachute battalion had suffered a lot of casualties. I mean, they wasn't a full-size normal infantry battalion of 800 guys. I think there were about 500 initially in the full strength, but they suffered a lot of casualties. That's almost 30% casualties. In Gavutu, assault at Gavutu. So they suffered a lot of casualties, and their commander Williams was actually shot too. He was wounded, but so they're out of commander. So what Vandegrift did, he just combined both of them to form an 800-man battalion. So you had a combination of the Raiders. So the para guys went with the Raiders after that. Anyway, the Raiders hit first, Paras come in the second landing. So they advanced through. They're a bit of a firefight. At one stage, they were under fire from a 75 millimeter. The Japanese said, "Okay, all right, let's start firing some 75 millimeter rounds." And I won't go into too much detail, but there's some, I guess, being under fire from 75 millimeter. I don't know if it's funny, but there's a couple of funny elements in there when some of the Marine officers are yelling out to the Japanese to keep their heads, yelling different things to them. But anyway, they end up destroying the Japanese supplies and rear dump. I don't know if some of you viewers might be familiar with the American Civil War, but as soon as I read this thing, it always reminds me of the Stonewall Jacksons when they hit Manassas Junction, and then they overran a big supply dump, and the guys were filling their pockets and with different things, and they end up burning up. The same thing happened here. You had the Raiders, which the Marines generally didn't get much food anyway, especially on Guadalcanal, but on Tulagi, they got hardly anything because, they left all their supplies, the Raiders, on the ships, and, they went into Guadalcanal just to eat. So when the Raiders got there, they were they had tins of crab meat, you had beef slices and all kind of good stuff. Japanese beer, they loved that. Japanese cigarettes, they just loaded their pockets full of stuff. So when the Raiders left there, all the pockets were bulging. They had a big fire. They urinated on the rice things, rice bags. They cut them over with bayonets. They towed the guns out into the sea. They threw the breech blocks in the sea. They basically just wreaked havoc on the Japanese rear supply dump of Kawaguchi, whose brigade had just advanced going toward Henderson Airfield. So it put the Japanese at a major disadvantage then because their supplies were gone. and their rear base were gone. So after that, they did the raid. They come back to Lunga Point, which is the Marine perimeter. So the Japanese High Command, and at one stage, Kawaguchi, the guy on the ground, said, "Let's go back and attack." He goes, "No, let's continue and advance toward Bloody Ridge." Or at that stage, sorry, my cat just fell off the table. Kind of distracted me.
Mine do that all the time. Mine start a fight behind me when I'm doing the show, which is, yeah.
I gave him a talk before I started. Leave me alone. Anyway, yeah. So then they moved back to the perimeter. So the Japanese High Command still thought the Marines was there in force. And actually sent some planes to bomb it at one stage. And you bombing your own guys. And wow. Anyway, so they've set the stage. This was on the 8th. So they went back in the perimeter. Right. And so their intelligence, the biggest thing too, they gather intelligence. I noticed you're going to have another episode on Tregascus.
Tregascus tomorrow. Yeah. That's tomorrow's show.
Well, I'm sure the author had talked to you about when everyone was filling their pockets full of beer and cigarettes and food. But Tregascus, who was just a correspondent, saw all these papers and he started grabbing them, throwing them in a blanket. So he saved all these paperwork, and all the paperwork basically said here's these guys, and it's great intelligence. About 3,000 fresh troops. So it's actually about 3,000 to 4,000 fresh troops. So it gave the Marines indication that the Japanese were coming. So this now we're at Bloody Ridge. We set the stage at Bloody Ridge. So this is going
to be the main part of it. So we'll go through the presentation. Dave, if you want me to fire up some video clips, I can do that as well. But we'll probably save them to a bit later on, folks, when we can do them one at a time. But this is what we've done. So we've set the scene. So we're talking a few days later in September 42. So I'll hand back to you. And people are loving this, Dave. So if you're enjoying it, I'm enjoying it. They're enjoying it. So let's keep going.
All right, good. So I love these maps. I think this map from the US Army military history map. I have to say, I love these maps. And if you ever go in the Guadalcanal maps, look under Miller, the US Army history. He's got some great maps. Anyway, so you see the perimeter there, the Marine perimeter. Marine perimeter is about 18 miles long. At this stage, before Vandergrift didn't have enough Marine troops to do a 360 manning the 360 perimeter. So what he basically did, you see on the left, he had the 5th Marines over the Lunga, a bit over the Lunga in the Kukum area. So where that far left red arrow is, so that was their far left perimeter. Far right perimeter with the 1st Marine Regiment was anchored on Alligator or Ilu River or Creek. And then also you had the front perimeter, right? Because the Marine Command being obviously amphibious doctrinated, they thought the main assault, if Japanese were going to come, they hit the flanks in August 21st at Alligator Creek, but they thought the main assault would come straight on Lunga, the perimeter up top there. Because that was the first place the Marines wanted to attack initially, but they attacked at Beach Red, even though they didn't want to attack there, but they knew it was undefended. But anyway, so they thought Vandergrift, at that stage, you'll see, you probably can't see, but there's a little flag there. It says 1st Marine. You probably can't see it from there, but the little flag with the infantry, where the airfield is, see the airfield right below it, you'll see the little flag. Yeah. Little flag denotes the 1st Marine Division headquarters. Before that, if you look at the airfield up and to the left, right before the river, on the right side of the river, there's some contour lines, some ridges. So that was where the 1st Marine Division command post was before. So every day, it would be bombed by bombers around about 11 o'clock or 12. They call it Tojo time. And at night, the naval gunfires would hit them. So the Marines called it the V-ring. The V-ring in those days was the middle of a target, like a bullseye, the V-ring. Yep. So anywhere in there, they call it we're inside the V-ring. So Vandergrift said, I'm going to move my command post because we're getting smashed all the time. I want to move it up on this ridge, right, to get out of the bombing. So he moved it up on the ridge. He actually moved it on Bloody Ridge, which we'll find out a bit later. It might not have been the smartest move at the time. Anyway, he's moved up on Bloody Ridge. You see the little, where the Marine Corps emblem is. Go to the left of that, you'll see the one. That was where the command post was during the fight. Yeah, so go back to the other one. It shows the main map we were on before. So Edson and Thomas, the chief of staff, and Edson said, look, if you're going to move a unit through the thick jungle, Vandergrift thought the Japanese were going to come straight down the coastal track, the main road there, and attack this and replicate, or the same attack that the October 21st attack by Ichiki from Alligator Creek. Right? He thought they were going to do the same thing, but Edson and Thomas said no, and the scouts were telling them too. These guys are going south. Right? They're probably going to go south of the airfield and come in because. Oh, that's what I was going to say before, because the perimeter was only wasn't 360 men. So the southern line was where the least expected attack. So what Vandergrift had done there, it was lightly manned. You've got the pioneers, which is like the combat engineers in today's terms, and you had the Amtrak guys. Well, they were manning outposts, squad level outposts on key high points. And if you go there, you can see. If you're going to put guys out, you can really see where you put them, but more like outposts. So they covered that with a loose line of outposts and combat patrols. So that was pretty much well open down there. Now you can really see it here. You got a thick jungle. So Japanese love to attack at night. So if you're moving a large body of troops on a jungle attack, it's very essential that you have a clear, delineated avenue of approach. Edson and Thomas said, look, if I was a Japanese commander, this is what I would do. I would come out of the jungle and I would use that ridge as my main avenue of approach. So once you popped on that ridge, and you can see it's like a knife pointing straight to the airfield. So they come out of that ridge, and the Japanese knew they had air reconnaissance. They had guys on the patrols. They knew that area was unmanned basically, and if they could put 3,000 Japanese in a concentrated attack straight down that ridge, they'd overrun the airfield very quickly. So it was actually a good plan. You hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, Japanese, they do mass bonsai charges. They don't do planning." They did. Japanese, especially on Guadalcanal, did a lot of good planning. There's all kind of other factors. It derailed their plans. The jungle was probably the biggest, but yeah. So that was the attack. And Kawaguchi. This is probably a good time to talk to Kawaguchi. Major General Kawaguchi was the Japanese commander. He had something called the 35th Brigade. The 35th Brigade was a real good brigade. They were slotted to go into Port Moresby. They were part of the South Seas Detachment. They were going to, before Midway, they were picked to invade, I think, Fiji. But they had been fighting. They fought in Borneo against the Dutch, I think a British Indian battalion. And they did quite well in Borneo and Java. Well, Borneo, I know. But anyway, these guys are experienced troops. So he had a brigade, and he had like 6,000 guys all up, and he divided them a bit. Most of them landed there at Tabu Point. Some landed to the west. We see a little red arrow under a guy called Colonel Oka. He had the 124th Regiment. That was what the 35th was based on. So they were good troops. But he had to move through the jungle, and so he was at a bit of a disadvantage because the logistics was gone because Raiders had knocked it out, and his heavy artillery or artillery was hard to carry through the jungle, so I had to man-pack him through. And I've walked his route, and it's not an easy route, I guarantee you that. Anyway, so we set the stage. They were to come up and to attack on the 12th. That was the attack. The Japanese had their attack plan was you had the Kuma Battalion, which was the second echelon of the Chiki guys. They were going to attack on the right flank. So go back to the main one. Oh, that's a good map. I'll go to get that in a second. Go back to the other one real quick, and I'll get us to that one. So they were supposed to attack. Oh, one back one.
Sorry, my mistake.
They're supposed to attack on the right flank as a diversion, and then you had the Colonel Oka and his the battalion, reinforced battalions, going to attack on the left flank. So they're going to hit both flanks, draw the Americans there. Then the main effort is going to shoot up from the south. Right. So they replicated this 3 different times, 3 major offensives, all using the same plans throughout the Guadalcanal campaign. The first time was a reinforced battalion. This one was a reinforced brigade, and then the last one was a reinforced division. So that was the plan.
Right.
So now we're set. So Edson said they're going to come there. So Vandergrift said no, they're not. Anyway, Edson and Thomas convinced Vandergrift. He goes, look, the Raiders have been hit pretty hard. At least can they go up on the ridge to take a rest, be a rest area, also provide a little bit of a bodyguard or protection for your command post. He goes, yeah, whatever. So you read the accounts of the Raiders, normal Raiders, they said, well, we don't go anywhere to rest. this is bull crap. We're not going anywhere to rest. Something's up. So they moved up there, and the first couple hours they're in a nice, admin bivouac. Then Edson and them walk by and they go, okay, grab your gear. We're going up to the ridge. So they went up there. They didn't have any entrenching tools hardly. When the Navy left, they only had 18 spools of barbed wire. So what limited resource they had to put out one strand of barbed wire, and they started digging in. Those ridges are coral ridge, they go coral ridges, and that's one of the ridges are bare in Guadalcanal. And you can't dig in those unless you had some proper tools. So they tried their best. They dug in, and then he started positioning his guys out. And he goes, they'll be coming. They'll be coming soon. So you can see how he positioned his guys out there. Probably a good time for a video now, I reckon. That one, the Hill 2.
Hill 2, yeah. Which is, I think, is it that one?
So this is Edson's command post. This is hill number 2, or hill 123 in elevation. So you look, we're looking south, and that's looking at hill number 1 to the right. So Edson, he put his guys out. Yet at the time of the battle, you'll see another photo in a minute. It was all that below us was real thick jungle. The Lunga River's to the right, Mount Austin's to the upper right. So he used the road, that track, which we've seen to the left earlier, and you'll see it on the other photos. He put the Raiders to the right and the para guys to the left. You see, that's the track. That's the original track there. And he put the paras to the left and the Raiders to the right, used as a bit of a control line. If you go back to the other map that it shows the disposition. Yeah. So he knew the Japanese were going to come, but he didn't have that many guys. So it's thick jungle. So he put them in outpost size, like a 360 platoon size, but he had spaces in between, but he covered the main trails and stuff. So he put C Company down between the Lunga River and the hill, and that's all flat, swampy area, and there's some lagoons in there, and it's some real to this day it's a real nasty area. And he had B Company Raiders and B Company para on the hill. So that was his front line. So these maps, that's why it's good to walk the ground. I can look at these maps here and you go, well, that looks nice and neat. But when you get on the ground, you can see those units are really back and forward. Depends on the terrain, because obviously you're going to put them with the terrain, and the terrain is a bit different. The Japanese called this a centipede, by the way, this hill, because it looks like a centipede because it has spurs shooting out both sides with the legs, and they called it the centipede. They very well, I heard a historian once saying the Japanese didn't even know it existed, which is, I find that hard to believe, because they flew over it every day with bombing raids, and they'd had a plan. Now I'll talk about that in a minute when the naval gunfire. So that was how he set out his positions, and you can notice the 1st Marine Division was headquarters was back there. They brought up some 105 artillery, because the Marines had 105 and 75 millimeter artillery. So this is the top of the hill, and this is looking north. And for all you guys who love air power, Fighter Strip 1. Let me see if we see some. You can't see here, but Fighter Strip 1 is normally. Oh, I can see Florida Islands way out there too, but Fighter Strip 1 is to the right. So command post was on the other ridge to the far right. That was where the 1st Marine Division command post was, to the right, that spur. So this is looking down off the hill. That's looking back to the perimeter there. And Savo Islands off to the left, top left.
Oops. I'm just firing up videos while we're talking. So we'll keep. Where are we now? This aerial photo is really good. Again, showing the terrain there.
Yeah, and that shows. Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah, and that shows how the terrain was at the time. So you can see how the thick jungle came in, and then had the open coral ridges.
Yeah, and then the next one, I like this one. Well, we've got the commander. Just remind us who those 3 folks are.
Yeah, the guy on the right is Major General Vandergrift, the division commander. The guy in the middle is Edson, and the guy on the left is the Marine Commandant Holcomb. So this was October 20th. And he's up on that command post explaining the battle to the commandant and what he did that night. You can really see when they call him Eddie MO there. So I'll go straight into the battle, because I'm conscious of our timing. This is a great photo. This is made post-war, but it really depicts how the terrain was. And you can see how close it was to the airfield. That's about 1,000 yards from the airfield. The whole ridge is about 1,600 yards, but then it's about 1,000 yards to the airfield. So you can see if the Japanese come in that jungle, hit the spine and went straight down Bloody Ridge, it could have been straight in there with thousands of Japanese and overtaken the airfield, and it'd been all over.
It's just like an arrow pointing straight at it, isn't it? I mean, you're going to talk later on about the kunai grass and the difficulty if you're low of seeing where you are, but it makes complete military sense. If you're following that ridge line, you know that it's going exactly where your objective is. You can completely see why the Japanese planned to use that ridge. It makes complete sense.
And they can move guys quickly through there. Quickly, yeah. So I love that photo. That was from Peter Flahaven. He's a Guadalcanal then and now photos. He does.
He's another great expert. And there's a hand drawn. Tell us about the hand drawn map there.
Yeah, I don't know where this actually came from. I was sent this. I think it's made during the battle. This is a very good one. It's a very good, very detailed and very accurate. You can see the Amtraks and Pioneers off to the left of Lunga, how they had they're covering those hilltops. And guys who know where they've been to Guadalcanal, it's near Betacama School. That's an area there. I did a lot of research in that, walking those hills. All right, so you can see the diversionary attack by the 13th and 14th. You can look in my videos. It's called the Battle of the Overland Trail, and it's a battle forgotten by William Barsh. He mentions that too, and that's a good if you really want to know about that battle, diversionary attack. So you say Hill 80, Hill 120. I'll say something about Hill 1 and Hill 2, how the Marines did it. The Marines at that stage, nowadays we number by feet and meters in elevation like they did here. The U.S. Army did that. But the Marines, for some reason, I don't know, because it probably can't count. Who knows? That's an inside joke.
I'm glad you said that, not me.
Yeah, I don't care. But they started with Hill 1, Hill 2 consecutively, Hill 3. And that's why if you ever read anything like the Thin Red Line, the Galloping Horse, and you go to all that area, it's like Hill 53, Hill 43. And someone says, oh, this is taller than 43 meters. But that's what they did. And Hill 1 was Hill 120. They started there, and they just worked their way westward. So that's how sometimes it gets confusing with people studying Guadalcanal. Yeah, so that's how they had a good outline there. So basically, Kawaguchi, he came in, and unfortunately, the jungle, I could take 100 guys and put them in that thick jungle and just say, go 100 meters, and you wouldn't have 100 guys at the end. They'd be scattered all about, and that's what happened there. He's got his 3 battalions couldn't get in their attack positions on time. They got intermingled. And they only had to go down. When you walk in that thick jungle, you take the path of least resistance. You're not going to go through the thick jungle there. You won't go far. So everyone's walking down track. So battalions are intermingling each other. Communication was gone. They're all over the place. So the Japanese at that stage had knew the Marines were up on that hill and manning it. So their plan to go straight up and over went off. So if you study Japanese tactics, infantry tactics, they love infiltration. I was told one time the best way to describe it, say you take water and you pour it down a hill. Well, the water goes in the path of least resistance. So that's what they did. They'd fix a point, they'd find a strong point, and they'd try to infiltrate around it very quick and speed. It's like a jungle blitzkrieg, so to speak. So that's what they did. But unfortunately, the Japanese, they were very centralized. They didn't give a lot of initiative to their junior NCOs and officers. So once they get a plan, they got to stick to it. And attack, even when you're against all odds, attack. That was, especially this stage of the war, that was their whole mentality was always attack. I'll go always on the offensive. So Kawaguchi, he didn't really have much control, but his battalion commander, he goes, well, I can't attack straight up the hill. What I'll do, well, we don't really know, but we'll go between the ridge and the river in the first and night attack, and we'll hit there. I think it was maybe a probing attack or envelopment, because they knew the Marines were up on the hill. They're not going to go that way, so let's see if we can go around them. So we'll just infiltrate around, which is classic Japanese tactics. But they got into the thick jungle there. Well, if you can go to another map, I'll show you. And they hit C Company. And C Company was an isolated post. There. Yeah, go back to the other one. That one. You can see come the first one. One battalion of the Japanese. Some of them were actually in the river, trying to go the path of least resistance. The Japanese. In fact, Kawaguchi had his command post on the riverbank there the first night. Anyway, they tried to punch through. They actually overran a lot of the Marine Raiders. They overran them because, there were just so many of the Japanese. But the guys, B Company, it's very eerie. You go up on the ridge down. If you look straight down when you're up there, you can say, I've been up there at night many times too. You can just picture yourself listening to the fighting going below you from the guys in the B companies there and thinking, what's happening? But a lot of these guys were getting cut off and overran. They had a lagoon there too, and it's still to this day still there. And the Marines, when they were going into their positions in C Company, they were crossing this one log on this lagoon. They kept thinking, if we got to get out of here, we got to go back across that slippery log. So yeah, in fact, a few of them had to retrograde that night. Anyway, they attacked that night and they overran a few. The C Company pushed them back, and then the attack petered out, and then daylight came. So when daylight came, you basically had Edson was there with his line basically refused to the right. The Japanese were in a thick jungle. Still had guys up on the top. So what he did was, he goes, okay. He was sitting at, apparently he called a command group. And he's sitting there and they said he was sitting on a box of ammo eating cold potatoes. He said, they were just probing us tonight. We know there's thousands of them. They'll probably come back with more tonight, maybe less, but they'll definitely come back. So what he did was, he knew that his right was refused. And he goes, well, this is not going to be good because you're going to cut off my two companies up on that first hill. So what he did was, he goes, let's see if the Japanese are still in the jungle. So early that morning or mid-morning, he sent two companies in to the jungle to do a bit of a counterattack, right? But when they went in there, they found out very quickly the Japanese were dug in the jungle. So they took a couple of casualties and they moved back out. So he says, this is what we'll do. Japanese thinks I'm on that hill. If they push in, they're going to potentially cut two of my companies off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull everyone back. So he pulled everyone back about 400 meters. And by doing that, go back to the main map. I don't know if we got it one in the second night. I don't think is that the first night? Yeah. So you can see the second line he's formed there. He's pulled them back. And then when you go, and what that actually did was, that opened up about 200 to 300 yards of open terrain, right? And I have to, I'll bring it in this point. The artillery had moved up. You got Pedro de Val, which was the brigadier general. He was the head of the artillery. He personally came up and did the pre-registering of the guns. So they had that whole area pre-registered. They had 2-5, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, the only reserve they had, and they were there by the airfield. So they were waiting for the Japanese second night. So Kawaguchi had his 3 battalions. And he said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We will do another attack to their right flank. It hasn't been confirmed. Like a friend of mine who's he's probably the best historian in my terms in Marine historian on this battle, especially in some of the Raiders, John Hoffman. And if you read any of his work, John was basically saying it was probably theorized that Kawaguchi sent that battalion to the left the second night to potentially draw the Marines off the ridge. Then he was going to attack straight up the ridge with the 2 battalions. I failed to mention too on the first day, the second day the Raiders had went up on the ridge. Every day the Japanese would bomb Henderson, but the second day they're there, they dropped a string of bombs straight down the ridge. They're prepping it, so the Marines knew, okay, this is another indication they're coming. And then the first night too, the Japanese had searchlights had a cruiser and 3 destroyers. They illuminated. You think how close they were, but they illuminated the ridge with searchlights, and they fired for a 20-minute preparatory bombardment before the first Japanese attack. I remember in 2011, I was on the first hill there, and I found a big slab of a naval in the shell, and I knew it wasn't American, so it had to be from that.
Wow.
It wasn't an aircraft bomb. It was from that attack. Anyway, the second night, they were ready to go. So you can see here, some more water. This is a good photo. It shows. This is hill number 2, Edson CP. So that middle spur there, right directly in front, then the furthest one is hill 1. The middle spur is where he put his B company. So I occupied that middle spur, then they went down in the thick jungle. Then the dividing road Then you had these pair guys to the left, and it actually hooks back again. Once again, if you look at a map, it just shows them a straight line. But if you go on the ground and read the terrain and ground, you can see exactly where they hooked them back. In fact,
that's the middle spur. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the middle spur. And you can see that's the left side of the road. So the pair guys are up on this. And you can see how they would hook that, and they just went to the left. But on a map, it shows like a nice straight line, which in reality is not. And that's that thick jungle. So the pair guys were here that night. This is the front line on the second night. So the Japanese attacked. They started coming to the left. And I'll mention the engineers. They brought a whole company of Marine engineers in, because everyone thinks about Bloody Ridge or Edson Ridge. It was the Raiders and the pair guys. But you had engineers there. You had 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines there. You know, they don't get mentioned a lot. Anyway, the Japanese came. They petered out. Their attack stalled in the thick jungle to the right again. And they were firing flares all the time up. And every time they do an attack, they'd fire a flare up to light the area up. So then their main attack came straight down the ridge, right? And they hit B Company. And this is the middle spur. And this is the command post of the company commander. He's in the reverse slope. If you go to some of my videos, you'll see this was the impact. I found that when the locals burned here for the gardens, you can walk around, and this area in particular looked like a back of if anyone's here seen a back of machine gun range, this looked like the impact zone of the back of machine gun range. It was just bullets, because they were firing straight from that hill there, straight into it. So this is where the Japanese had to attack across. They attacked straight down this hill, across this open area, and to the right, straight down that ridge. So leave it here for a minute, Paul. So Edson, Bravo Company was on this hill that say that I'm standing on when I took this photo. They get pretty hard, so they moved back too. So the pair guys to the left started moving out first. And then it wasn't a retreat or a draw. It was a fighting type of draw. It wasn't like everyone for themselves, every man for himself, and full on sprint. But they moved back. So I could drill a lot more detail, but I won't. But I'm calling it for time. There's still foxholes and stuff. There's one there. There's still foxholes and stuff all through here. Because they built up this line. This is the southern line after the Battle of Bloody Ridge. And then this is the southern line for 4 months. So they really built this area up. The Americans did, especially for the October. It's a good photo of Mount Austin. So the Japanese come over. They're attacking straight off that hill, straight toward the Marines. So the Marines at the end formed a horseshoe around hill number 1. Oh, sorry, hill number 2, which is Ed command post hill. They formed a horseshoe. So the Japanese made repeated assaults up the hill. Marines were throwing stacks of hand grenades. Artillery was blasting the Japanese. In fact, there was one report that the Japanese, they could hear the Japanese before every attack. The Japanese would yell and scream and hit their rifle butts and everything. But then the Marines started listening to that, and the artillery observers, every time they'd hear a lot of screaming, they just, they'd call in a lot of fire, and they just hear more screaming. With the 105s, they were actually doing rolling barrages up and down, back and forth, back and forth. And in fact, the 11th Marine Regiment is the artillery regiment. To this day, that night they fired 2,800 rounds. 2,800 rounds.
Wow.
And something like 3 batteries of 105s. And to this day, that's a record. In the regimental record to this day. And you'll see in one of my videos, I think it's called finding or exploring Edson's Ridge or something like that. And it shows the amount of artillery still there. Every time they burn off there, I mean, it looks like a artillery field fire range. There's so much splinters and stuff all over the place. They really blasted that place. And that artillery is probably what saved the day for the Raiders. But anyway, and then at one stage, the pair guys were pushed back. Edson tried to find the parachute commander. He couldn't find him, so he said, Captain Torgerson, you're now the commander. Some accounts say you're relieved. He found the commander, but he's hiding in the hole. He just relieved him on the spot. The pairs formed 2 companies and did another counter assault and pushed the Japanese out of a ravine. It's off to the left. So they're yelling back to the command post. One of the battalion commanders of 2-5. They're yelling for him, yelling at his name. And finally, one of the runners went back, and they started sending one company up at a time. And during this whole time, Edson Edson was standing on an ammo box, moving back and forth at this location right here. So he was moving back and forth. Bullets was nicking his clothes, and his sergeant major said it's like he could care he lived or died. He was instrumental to the men. And at one stage, the men were going to pull out, some of the guys, because they started yelling like gas. And there's a few theories of what happened. The Japanese are using magnesium flares. They had smoke pots going, and they yelled out charge. And that's actually the front slope of the hill there that they did their last stand. They were yelling out charge for some reason. I can't speak Japanese, but charge sounds like gas. I don't know. I'll just take a person's word for it, what I read. But then it started to move out, and Edson basically started him and Ken Bailey started yelling at him. Now Ken Bailey, he was wounded at Tulagi, shot in the leg. They sent him back to New Caledonia. They said, but him and another raider. That's a great photo. You can see that's him there. But him and another raider went AWOL from New Caledonia and made their way back. And he made it back just in time for the battle. And he's normally C Company's commander, but Edson says, you can just be my operations officer. So Bailey, like I said, he's about 6'3", 6'4". He made numerous runs back and forth to get ammunition. He was running back and up and down the hill, inspiring the men. He got shot in the head by Japanese arrows soccer around. He had blood running down his face. He was in tennis shoes. That's something a lot of people don't know. That when he went AWOL, he didn't have time to get his boots. So he's running around up on the ridge during a fight with just a pair of runners on or tennis shoes. But he was yelling when the gas attack came. He was very instrumental. I mean, I think him and Edson both took their 45s out and started yelling at him. These are all good photos. This is right after the battle. And I remember Edson yelling to him. He says, one thing the Japanese have that you don't have is guts. He goes, stay in your hose. If you need to, you can die in your hose. And he's yelling out to him. And they did. They held. And some of the Japanese did infiltrate around. Fighter 1 was an auxiliary field between there and Henderson. And some of them made it, but engineers were guarding that, and they ended up fighting off the Japanese. One note, though, when I talk about Vandergrift, the Major General, who always like to say he made his bed and he had to lie in it because he moved his division CP up on that last ridge. To his credit, like you'd expect a good Marine general to do, he stayed there during the whole battle. Bullets are flying all around him. At one stage, it was something like out of the movie We Was Soldiers once, when they showed this scene in the command post where they're charging through and the sergeant major takes his 45 out. That's what happened there. There was 3 Japanese, one with a sword, charged into the division command post. They killed one gunnery sergeant, but Sergeant Major Sheffield Banta, which is what you'd expect, old hardcore, old corps sergeant major. Apparently, he was berating a Marine at the time. He's a classic sergeant major. Took his 45 out and killed one of the Japanese offhand. Just shot him offhand. That's been verified by a few sources. And then continued on berating a Marine about something. Typical sergeant major. This is a great photo. It was taken. I don't know if it was drawn by a Marine Raider, but it depicts the Marine Raiders on Edson Ridge during the second night. So you can see the artillery behind them to the left. You can see the flares going off. You can see the Japanese attacking up the hill. You see the Marines there, and they're throwing the grenades and the whole crates and boxes of grenades there. And other Marines run up the hill with ammunition, handing the ammunition out. The BAR and the 1903 Springfield rifles.
And we had a question. Where was the Marine artillery coming from?
They moved up a whole battery of 105s. They only had, they had a battalion of 105s, which was 3 batteries. They had them at the airfield. So they're almost firing.
They're back up at the airfield. So in that photo there, back up at the top there.
Yeah. And then 105, they had some 75s. You see where Vandergrift CP is?
Yeah.
Off to the left, they had, I think, one or maybe 2 batteries of 75 millimeters. They were the ones patterned after the French 75s from the Great War.
Right, yeah.
So they had those, but they had artillery firing all the time. In fact, the Japanese, some of their after-action reports said the Marines had automatic cannons, they called them, automatic cannons, because there were just so much coming down on their heads. And the thing about the Japanese, it reminds me, Kawaguchi, the Japanese only thought there were 2,000 Marines here. Only 2,000 Marines. So that's why they thought he had 6,000 guys all up, not on this attack. He had about 3,000 here, but he had other ones on the flanks. And he actually, they said, you want another battalion? He goes, no, I can do it with what I've got here. Send the other battalion to in New Guinea. So they severely underestimated the amount of Marines there. But at that time, there's probably about 13,000 Marines on the island.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but there's only 800 Marines at this point here. But the second night, there's probably maybe another about 900. So they were attacked almost 3-to-1 odds. And they held. Now this is a big what if. If they would have pushed through and took the airfield, the major what if, because the airfield would have been taken, the unsinkable aircraft carrier would have been gone. That was the only thing that was keeping the American supplies coming in during the day, was that aircraft. So if they didn't have any aircraft, then it would have failed. So the Marines would either surrendered, or their plans was to go to the hills and fight. Would have been a major setback. I mean, it would have probably affected how the Marine Corps is today, and it would have affected the whole morale, because the Japanese would have had that airfield, and then they would have stationed bombers there. And the whole original plan for taking it was to prevent the Japanese from cutting off the supply line to Australia. So that was their main goal at one stage. They thought, we're going to invade Australia. We know it now. At the time, they thought they were, but we can cut Australia off, and maybe they can beg for a separate peace. And then deny the American the staging base for Australia. So the big what if is, in fact, Richard Frank, which is probably one of the best historians, I think, on Guadalcanal, is a great book, very well researched. Frank basically says that this is probably the most important battle of Guadalcanal, the battle that saved Guadalcanal, and had other implications too, and elsewhere in the theater. Like, say, for example, you had at the time, you probably read, or your viewers would have seen on the other ones, the Kokoda Trail, or Kokoda Track, some people call it different things. The Japanese South Sea Detachment was at Port Moresby. They could see the lights of Port Moresby, and they were pretty much depleted, but they could see them. After this defeat, the Japanese High Command had an emergency meeting, and they said, look, we can't maintain two simultaneous fights, right? The Americans have basically drew the line in the sand. They want this to be an attritional battle. This is where they want to fight us. All the resources going to Papua New Guinea. We're not sending them there anymore. We're sending them straight to Guadalcanal. The guys, what you want to do is just to withdraw, hold, and wait for further reinforcements. But that allowed the Australians time to regroup, especially get the regular guys over from the 7th Division over, and to push over. So that
I'm glad you mentioned that, Dave, because one of the things I've been trying to get across on this channel is that the way this history has been told is Australian historians and experts talk about New Guinea and Port Moresby, and American experts and historians talk about Guadalcanal. Well, the Japanese treated it as one campaign, and in order to bring it and make more sense of it, you have to look at these two campaigns as being the same one running simultaneously, because that way you get the overall picture. And I think over the years, this tendency to focus each nation on its own involvement has been at the expense of the greater battle.
I agree, and then it's arguable, but I think the turning point of the Pacific War for the Allies was the combination of the victory at Bunagona and Guadalcanal. So Bunagona was January 43, Guadalcanal was February 43. But Midway, I don't think was a turning point, because the turning point is when one side when the strategic initiative shifts. After Midway, the strategic initiative didn't shift. The Japanese are still on the offensive. And in fact, even though this is the U.S.'s first offensive, it was really offensive defensive. We went there, we took the airfield, and we went into the defense. Right? Japanese were on the offense. The last offensive the Japanese did was in October here, and it wasn't until November that it was a sure thing. We thought we were still going to, or the Allies thought they were still going to lose, and then so it was only with the combined victories, right? The strategic initiative shifted, because before Guadalcanal, and the Japanese admitted this too, before Guadalcanal, the Japanese made the initiative, and they made the decisions. The Allies reacted. After Guadalcanal, Allies set the initiative. So that, to me, is the strategic turning point. That was the strategic shift. But
I think I agree with you, and I think in general, Dave, I think when people ask us, so what are the turning points? people want to have one turning point. Inevitably, a war is changed on several turning points. There are, you can, to put it all down to one is maybe, not silly, but it's there for the Navy, for carrier tactics, for the use of the Navy. Yeah, I see how Midway is important, but for guys on the ground, boots on the ground, for the Marine Corps, for the Japanese troops on islands, Guadalcanal, and as you say, New Guinea at the same time, and Buna and Gona, it's a turning point. So brilliant stuff. So let's talk a little bit about the stuff you found there, because people are intrigued by the fact you've walked there, you've effectively lived there. So obviously these are Garand clips, because Springfields are more common there, but M1 Garands are starting to come in, aren't they?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like the second Raiders were issued with the M1 Garands. Right. I think because it had the political pull and everything, because James Roosevelt, President Roosevelt's son, was executive officer of the second Raider. So Edson actually asked some people, Edson was a champion shooter and everything. He stuck with the 03s because he's a great shot and he wanted that, the tradition was. But no, they actually requested the M1s, but they didn't get them in supply. And the old rising guns too, which is another factor. But yeah, now it's hard to say that, because this area of the southern line, once the 7th Marines landed in 18 of September, Vandergrift had enough guys to form a whole 360. So this line actually became a nursery line for a while, especially when the Army attacks in December and January. So they'd rotate units through there. So, just in some of these, I can't associate sometimes, this was used during the Bloody Ridge Battle, because of, for almost 3 months, Army and Marines were occupied there. But yeah, that's a strip 03 stripper clip on the left. And that's a Garand on the right. But there's stuff's everywhere there, like that. That was probably in situ left when the guy fired it. All those are 30-06 rounds, either from it could be for anything really. I think from a machine gun, because it was in a machine gun position.
They look like the ends of the cases are a bit smashed, don't they? Which to me, from my Normandy digging, implies machine gun more than rifle, because of the shells tend to be more damaged from a machine gun. Certainly with them German stuff, the rifle shell cases seem to be intact, but if it's an MG34 or 42, they tend to kind of fracture at the end.
But see, these weren't on the ground. These are on everything I'm showing here is on top of the ground.
Yeah,
that's just when they burn it off. It's just stuff. It just yeah, and that's probably might be from weathering too. I love this photo. Unfortunately, you got people who go there, and I don't even know if this is still there. They just said, "I'll take this as a good relic," which it is. I mean, this is one of the barbed wire lines in front of hill number 1, and just the battle damage there. You can see the bullet impacts. The old,
as you said earlier, they only had the one strand of barbed wire that has precious few defensive equipment there, and they can't dig in because it's coral. So
exactly right. And some of this
barbed wire pickets.
Yeah, so I don't think this is associated. Edson's guys didn't put this out. Like I said, this is part of the occupied later, when they started building that area up. So the 7th Marines probably put this one in. They had like 3 or 4 strands. We could go into like the 7th Marines and John Basilone stuff. It's real thick in there. So that's a good, and some of that stuff is still there. I mean, that's the front slope of hill number 1. And the Japanese attacked up that hill. So this is the day afterwards. So that's a guy called Corporal Winters, I think. His name's Winters. I don't know what rank is. He's the driver for Sewell, who was the main photographer. So my mate Peter Flavin actually used to speak to the Lieutenant Sewell, took a lot of these photos, and he'd get the background behind them. But you see the shallow trenches there. So this is on top of hill 1. Or sorry, hill 2, with Edson's command post, the last final hill. And over to the top right is where the division command post was. It's a bit deceptive here, but that hill dropped straight down. Right. But you can see how close the fighting was. I mean, the Japanese would come straight out of the jungle. You know how much field of fire there. I mean, you could see the foxholes there. And they're still there. Those little shallow trenches are still there. In fact, the first aid post was right there at Defilade, a little bit below there. And they were working on that's where and there's stuff like that everywhere. That, and the Japanese knee mortar rounds is probably the most dangerous. You don't mess with any of them. Japanese hand grenade. These are all at the foot of hill 2. Excuse me. Their stuff's still there, even in the locals.
And that's a knee grenade there. A knee mortar there.
Yeah, that's a grenade. Japanese, I think, Type 18 grenade launcher, but most people know them as the Japanese knee mortars. Very dangerous little things there. Very dangerous. And now, obviously, I didn't leave these in situ. I didn't touch them. But what I would do is the contacts I had over there, I'd just mark them.
Yeah.
And the guys would come pick them up. You find a lot of those.
I found a few of those over the years in Normandy. Yeah, mortar clovers. Yeah, that's a common. You either find none or lots when you find them. It's normally
they're heaps. Japanese gas mask filter.
Brilliant stuff.
It's everywhere.
And I think we're going to have to save the river battle for another show, Dave, because we're an hour and a half now. But let's do some of the more videos now, because people live the video content. So I'll load a few more up, and then you can. So if people are just still want to get an idea of the terrain and the views and things, we'll do those now. So I'll load them up one by one. And talk about the kunai grass there, because when we've talked about it before, Dave. When we talk about jungles, there's jungle and there's jungle. The jungles of New Guinea, the jungles of Guadalcanal, the jungles around. It changes depending on the elevation. It changes on the altitude. It changes on the terrain. So the kunai grass is sort of kind of typical of this. So describe what it's like walking through.
Well, in this photo, you can see where they've been burning off and cutting it, but generally sometimes it's 5-6 foot high. Couple of meters. Now you hear reports, it's razor sharp, and as soon as you touch it, you have, I didn't find that. If you're climbing up a bank or something, you grab it, it will cut your hand. But what is so bad about it, I think, is when you're in a field of it, it's just like you're walking in an oven anyway in Guadalcanal, but as soon as you walk in that kunai grass, any breeze goes, and I'd say the temperature goes up a couple of degrees Celsius easy. A few degrees Fahrenheit. So it's just, and if you moving through there and it's muddy, it's just hard. As I say in Australia, it's hard yakka. It's very hard moving through that stuff. No, it's not. And they have some vines. I mean, when I grew up, we used to call them, wait a minute vines, the briars and all that. But there's some pretty bad, I don't know what they call them. Somebody could probably tell me, but they're like little vines and they got little barbs on them. It's like little barbed wires, and you hit one of them, you ain't moving, and it just rips your face up and arms, and So that I did this one just to show you how the kunai grass is. It's actually very peaceful, very peaceful. This is on hill number 1. It's very peaceful on Bloody Ridge. I mean, I've been to Bloody Ridge, I estimate over 300 times. I mean, I could close my eyes and see the whole thing, but I used to go up there and just, I'd get a book on Guadalcanal, so I'd read up there, or I'd just go up there and sit. Very peaceful.
Well, this is why we've had you on, because some historians, brilliant historians, they base their stuff on that after action reports and archives. You've been there, you've walked this ground. That's what makes it so different.
No, you can't. Nothing beats walking the ground. I mean, nothing beats it.
A bit weird.
Yeah, you're a bit frozen on me, but I think I'm still here.
Hang on.
Yeah, nothing beats walking the ground. So you can see that photo there. You can see Savo Island in the distance for some of you viewers is familiar with the naval campaigns. I think we might have lost Paul. Nope, he's back.
My browser crashed on me there. I never had that before. Sam, we're back, folks. That was
it could be the Australian influence. By the way, anybody that looks at my videos, I have to apologize. I mean, I really don't apologize, but I was filming everything on an iPhone 7. I edited it on an iPhone 7 and had to upload it on a Solomon Islands internet.
Wow. And there's some more of your video of the relics there.
Yeah, you can just see it's stuff everywhere.
We had a question, Dave, from History Underground about what is the best time of year to visit Guadalcanal. I'm assuming JD is thinking about going there to take some videos. Is there a preferable time of year to see it in the best condition?
If you're talking about the weather, but the best time of the year to go is in August, because August is all the anniversary, and you have the anniversary ceremonies and stuff, and the atmosphere of it. April, May is part of a Japanese grenade. April, May is probably the best time for the weather, but it's always wet. You know, some months are wetter. I mean, they do have a wet and dry season, but just like the guys used to say, it's not dry. Still rains every day or two.
What I was saying before I got cut off by my browser crashing is that some historians, they're used to writing stuff based on after action reports, things like that. But the fact that when I pull these videos up, you can spot immediately where you are is proof of the fact you've been there, as you say, 300 times. And that's why we like having people like you on the channel, because it's the knowledge of the ground combined with the knowledge of the battle that makes things so special.
Yeah, nothing beats walking on the ground and studying in the terrain. So it's a whole combination. And you know, I like to do a lot of investigation. You know, I read something, I go, well, let's verify it. Let's go on the ground and actually see. You know, let's look at it. And I have another, I think, aspect. I can look at it from a military point of view. You know, when they said all machine guns are here, and I go, well, hold on a minute. If I was to do this, if I was to set machine guns in, or if I was to do it, how would I do it? How would I defend this? And I said, well, what I'm reading doesn't make sense, you know, but yeah, that it allows you to do that. So this is, yeah. So you can see some of the radio towers. That's Airfield 1 over there. That's the Florida Islands. That's Tulagi. Tulagi's in the far distance there in the Florida Islands. It's about 25 miles away.
And
you can see how it hasn't changed.
And as someone who's been there a lot, Dave, you know, when you perhaps, you know, you see regular documentaries or you watch the films, people talking about movies like The Thin Red Line and what have you. What is it that people get wrong about Guadalcanal in your opinion? When you see, you know, people doing internet articles, what's the thing that kind of frustrates you that people get wrong?
One thing, you know, they tend to leave out the U.S. Army. Right. So hopefully I can come on a show later and do one on the U.S. Army, because most people don't even know the U.S. Army was there, but they did especially in the December, January. So that's kind of they leave those guys out. Some of the episodes like the Mitchell Page and John Basilone, not too many people get the John Basilone episode correct. You know, look at Thin Red Line, things like that. I mean, we all pick apart, you know, the weapons. All, you know, they didn't have that weapon there. Or, you know, that the uniform's wrong. You know, and but I think, and they don't focus a lot on the naval and air. I mean, Guadalcanal, it's the first time in military history which you had such a large naval, air, and ground happened at the same time. And this is in U.S. Navy history. This is the most intense surface action they ever had in their whole history. And in Savo Island, you know, the greatest defeat in U.S. naval history. You had, to put it in perspective, you had over 1,000 sailors died in 30 minutes, and plus Australian was there. And in ground campaign, 1,500 soldiers and Marines died in 6 months. But 5,500 U.S. Navy guys died in the sound there. You know, this Guadalcanal, you know, destroyed the Japanese Air Force or the Naval Air Force. The Japanese couldn't fight the war and win the battle of attrition. So, no, but that, yeah, to answer the original question, yeah, those type of things.
No, well, what we'll do is we will bring you back, because there's only so much we can do. We've got other things you can talk about that we will talk about, but not today. The I can't pronounce that word. Matinalco River, is that right?
Some people call it Mantanico, but the locals in the water call it Matanico.
So we'll do that in a future date, because you know there's no point cramming more stuff in when we can give it more time. And definitely the US Army on Guadalcanal, because that's one of the things we've talked a lot about, is the fact that the people think the Pacific was won by the Marines. Of course, the Marines were hugely influential throughout the Pacific campaign, but as John McManus talks about, the US Army were there as well, and somehow they haven't had the movies where the Marine Corps have, and so it's important to talk about that. And we've talked about the air power. We can talk about that again. And people are already having requests to talk about Henderson Field, so we can do that as well. And as of course said, folks, don't forget to go to Dave's channel and see the stuff he's already done there. Again, the link is in the description below. So people definitely want you to come back. I'm just going to remind people what we've got coming up tomorrow, Dave, and I'll come back and say goodbye in a second. Right. So, folks, sorry, I was trying to pull up videos and stuff like that. Lots of controlling we to do. And sorry, I don't know why my browser collapsed for a minute or so there, but we were back online again. Tomorrow, my guest, Ray Boomhauer, is talking about Richard Tregaskis, who wrote, of course, Guadalcanal Diary. So he had an amazing career as a correspondent going up to Vietnam but we're going to concentrate on these Pacific footsteps. And then, of course, you can see what we've got coming up. We've got Black Dragon about with Steve McLeod coming up, all sorts of stuff. And of course, we've got an amazing live stream coming your way from Singapore soon. Ross Cable was watching on. He's part of that along with Professor Brian Farrell. That will be absolutely amazing there. So keep watching, keep sharing what we're doing, and thank you everybody for sticking with us. Thank you for the great comments in the sidebar there. I'll go back and read them later on. But right now, I'm just going to say thank you very much, Dave, for joining us. And you've got a day ahead of you, and my day is coming to an end. The wonders of time differences. But it's been really good talking to you. And when are you going to get back there? When does your work take you there again?
Well, right now, the due to COVID and everything, Guadalcanal is still locked down for tourists.
Yeah.
If you plan on going to Guadalcanal soon, you're probably be waiting. But I'm hoping the next few months. So I want to get back there. So, but thank you
like
for giving me.
You've got itchy feet to get out to the battlefield. I'm lucky I live in a battlefield, so I can pretty much walk out of my house to the battlefield. But for other people, they've got to travel there. So, well, folks, it's been absolutely brilliant. So we'll end things now. See you again, folks, tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. UK time for our show about Richard Dragaskis. But other than that, we're going to say thank you very much for your company. And this is Paul Woodadge and Dave Holland saying thank you very much. See you again next time.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Thanks, Dave.
Bye.